stayed there for a week, I believe it was, and we had a room, and we were trying to get a job in copper mines, but they were hiring. But we go every morning to, there were two mines right there in the, but you go to one and then you go to the other, you stand in line, and we come up to the employment window, tell them what you could do, and of course all we knew was the words they had told us, either a mucker or a, I haven't even forgotten the other couple of words. Anyway, that's what you reeled off them. If they need anyway, they might hire you. Anyway, a mucker was up to shovel the junk away after they put the vein, you know, and the stuff came down, they threw in the car the stuff that was ore that was to be taken to the smelter. The muck that was dirt, crumb, and that you shoveled into the other cars that they hauled out and dumped outside. And we didn't get jobs, but then we would go down to the gambling place. We tried gambling. I had played some poker a little bit before, so I played some poker and I think plus played some blackjack. But anyway, we wound up losing practically all of our money. So when we left Butte to go south, while we were broke, and we caught this train out of Butte. I think it was Milwaukee Road. But anyway, we got on the train, and it was a passenger train, and they had what they call the blinds on passenger train. That's what you ride when you bum a ride on that passenger train. And they are the from door to door, end to end, from one car to another that you walk through. They have those folding canvas things, and then those steel plates that come together to form a connection, keep the weather out and so on when you walk from one car to another. Well, on the front end of the first car, I should say, which is a baggage car, facing the tender, water tank and coal thing on the locomotive. There's a flange on the locomotive, and there's the flange in this folding thing on the baggage car. When the train is pulling out of the station, which we learned after we got on there, because there was no folding thing on the locomotive, when they pull, the couplings pulling out, well, it leaves a gap about a foot and a half wide between these flanges, and that's what you get into to get in the front. But we found out after we got in there that when the train is rolling and it's not pulling like on an upgrade, those two flanges come together just like that. If you got caught in between those two, you'd be down and smash you flat. So after we got on it, well, we suddenly realized that we had to be darn careful about that, because we had got on while we were pulling out of the station. It was that gap. So after we realized what was all involved, we knew that coming into a station, we wouldn't be able to get off, because they would come together, or might come together while you were getting off. The only way it was safe was to wait when we pulled out of a station, so that they were pulling. Then that would open up, and you could safely get out if you did it fast. So we rode that night, and then early morning we pulled into the town, and so we waited. We pulled out of the station. Well, we jumped off. We were actually only a half a block from the depot when we hit the ground, but they were pulling out, so we were safe and went on. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning. We went into the depot and waited until it got to be about 8 or so. Then we went downtown to see if we could get some food or find a job. And we were standing on the corner, and this man came up to us and said, "You fellas hunting for work?" And we said, "We sure were." And he was a rancher, and he had a ranch about 2-3 miles out of town, maybe it was 5. And it was haying time on the ranch, and alfalfa was raised irrigated land, raised alfalfa, the crop was ready to put up in the haystacks. So that's what he made. So that's what we did. We pitched hay for 3 weeks. Got the hay all put up, and then he said, "You guys ever ridden horseback? You know how to ride horseback?" And I said, "Yes, I have. I've ridden quite a bit," which I had, because I had ridden cattle and stuff before, riding bareback, but I'd also ridden the saddle too. So he said, "Well," he said, "my cattle are all up on summer range up in the mountains." And he said, "You have to go up and get them, bring them back down to winter, because you don't leave them up in the mountains. They bring them in so they can shelter them, so on." And he said, "We need to drive them back down." He said, "If you fellows can ride," he said, "we'll go up and get them." He said, "The 3 of us should be able to bring them back down." He said, "I'll tell you how to do it." So that's what we did. Went up to this ranch. So his horses were up there too. Had been out in the summer range. They had brought the horses in, so I was obviously kind of cocky about riding horseback and so on. So he said to me this one, his own particular favorite horse, actually, it turned out to be, but he wouldn't let me ride it. So he said to me when I was about to get on the horse, he said, "You don't mind if it bucks a little bit, do you?" Oh, no. Well, I'd never ridden a horse that bucked in my life. So I knew enough to keep the reins up short on the horse, so it couldn't get his head down if it was going to buck. Well, I had it too short, and the horse kept backing up, and I couldn't get on the horse. He said, "Maybe you better ease off on the reins a little bit." So I eased off on the reins a little bit and got on the horse, and of course I was shaking. I was so damn scared, and the horse just trotted off. He just laid it on me. Well, anyhow, that's when I got caught up with the blizzard. We went up into the mountains to get the cattle, and while we were getting the cattle rounded up, a blizzard came, and I tried to steer the horse, because I was pretty sure I knew where the ranch was. It turned out the horse didn't want to go that way, and finally got pretty cold. Wasn't doing too well at all, so the horse got his head, and he took me back to the ranch. I was completely turned around, but the horse knew where the ranch was. Well, I got pretty cold, pretty scared, but we got back to the ranch. We didn't even get all the way to the ranch. We got down out of the mountains and got down to where the ranch was. There was no blizzard. I was back up in the mountains. And so then the cattle had come down to a point. We got them heading into town. And then Bus and I took out from there.
So you did a little cowboy.
Yeah. And we took out from there. So when we got back to the ranch and got the cattle in the pasture and so on, this ranch, he was a nice guy. By this time, I kind of realized I didn't know much about anything. Just a cocky kid. So he said, "I'll show you how to ride a horse," he said. So he took his horse that I'd been riding. We were standing up by the house. We had gotten off the horse and this thing. So he said, "I'll show you how to ride a horse." So he took the horse that he had given me, put the reins up, and he jumped in there, and the horse let out a war whoop, and that horse took off like a scarlet egg, I mean, full outrun. Went about 100 yards, pulled it up, and the horse stopped just like that, skidded to a halt. He raised it up, and the horse reared up on his hind legs and spun around, and he came back to where I was. The horse reared up for him again there, and then came down, and he just got up. I said, "That's the way to ride a horse."
Oh, gosh.
Well, anyway, really, it it was very enjoyable. And then we got on the train and came on south to, somewhere along there, I slipped up on one thing. I can't quite remember how it was, but we were at Idaho Falls. No, it was down that same line. We came down to Pocatello, Idaho.
Were you still in the boxcars, or?
Well, yeah, we were riding freight trains. We came down to Pocatello, Idaho, and then we got on, called the Silver Dollar Division. It was the Oregon Short Line, and it was a branch of the Great Northern Railroad. But they called it the Silver Dollar Division, and they said the reason the bums called it that was because the railroad men on that division said nobody ride this division unless they pay $1. Well, we got kicked off that train going from Pocatello to Ogden. We got kicked off that train about 3 or 4 times. And the last time, they kicked us all off and stood us right at the depot, bunched us, and stood there ahead of us. The train was moving, like, say, this way, and so we're bunched here, and the brakie or conductor or both were standing up there, waiting to make sure nobody jumped on that train again. And so I said to Bus, I said, you watch, because we were in the dark train. I said, you watch, when that caboose comes by, I said, we'll run across the back end of the caboose and run up the other side and catch the train on the opposite side from where the braking conductor is standing. And that's exactly what we did. And the train was moving pretty fast.